The morning the news broke, the internet was already boiling. Headlines flashed across every phone screen and TV ticker. Judge rejects Carroll's $85 million demand. Trump declares victory. It wasn't just another court story. It was an explosion in a country already divided by opinions, politics, and endless arguments about truth. The moment it hit social media, everyone had something to say. In a small cafe in Columbus, Ohio, two friends sat by the window, phones glowing in front of them. Maya, a 31-year-old freelance journalist, was sipping cold coffee that she'd forgotten to finish. Across from her sat Ben, her old college friend who ran a local auto shop. The place smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon muffins, and a steady hum of conversation floated around them. But at that table, the air felt tense. "Did you see this?" Maya said, holding her phone toward Ben. Jean Carroll's demand just got thrown out. Trump's already calling it a huge win. Ben looked up, his brow furrowed. "Yeah, I saw. Guess the judge didn't buy the $85 million thing?" "Honestly, I'm not surprised." Maya leaned back in her chair, studying him. "Not surprised? The woman fought for years." "You don't think that means something?" He shrugged. "I don't know. At some point, it stops feeling like justice and starts looking like revenge. Maybe she's chasing money. Maybe attention. Who knows anymore?" Maya frowned. "That's not fair. People don't put themselves through years of public attacks for attention. This kind of case, this isn't about money. It's about principle." Ben smirked slightly, not out of mockery but frustration. "Principle or publicity? Everyone says it's about standing up for what's right, but then you see interviews, book deals, social media followers. It's hard to tell where courage ends and spotlight begins." Maya tapped her fingers on the table, thinking before she spoke. "Or maybe it's just hard for us to believe anyone would fight for something that doesn't give them anything back, especially when the person on the other side has power, money, and millions of supporters ready to destroy you online." That quiet line made Ben pause. Outside, a car horn cut through the air, and inside, a coffee grinder roared. He stared at his cup for a moment, then said, "You're not wrong about that part. The online crowd's brutal. But still, if the court rejected it, maybe it means the system worked." "The system worked?" Maya repeated softly. "Or the system just got tired?" The question hung between them. People around them were talking too. Some about the same story. A man in a gray hoodie at the counter was saying loudly that Trump had finally been proven innocent. A woman near the door muttered that the justice system was broken and biased. Everyone seemed to know what they believed, and no one seemed interested in what anyone else thought. Maya looked out the window, watching the wind blow dried leaves along the sidewalk. "You know what's strange?" she said quietly. "No one talks about what's true anymore. They only talk about who won." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Because that's how it works now. You pick a side, you cheer, you hope your side wins. Truth's optional." Her lips curved into a sad half-smile. "Yeah, feels like we turned justice into a sport." They sat there in silence for a minute, the cafe noise fading into background static. Ben checked his phone again. Videos, tweets, breaking news clips. Every headline had a tone. Trump destroys Jean Carroll. Carroll humiliated in court. Trump vindicated. Not one said anything about facts, or context, or what the ruling actually meant. It was all victory language. Maya glanced at his screen. "That's what people want, though. They don't want law. They want drama," he chuckled. "You say that like you're not a journalist." "I am," she said. "That's why it scares me." Ben leaned forward. "So what's your take? You think she deserved the $85 million? Maya hesitated. "I don't know about the number, but I think when someone says they've been hurt, the least we can do is listen. Maybe the claim was too big, but that doesn't mean the pain wasn't real." He nodded slowly. "Fair, but at some point people also have to let things go. You can't drag someone through court forever." "That's easy to say when you've never had to prove your truth to the world," she said. That hit a little harder than she meant. Ben didn't reply right away. He stared at the coffee cup again, his reflection swimming on the surface. The TV in the corner of the cafe was showing the story too. The host's voice was upbeat, almost celebratory. "Today, former President Trump responded with a statement calling the judge's decision a total exoneration," the anchor said. Clips of cheering supporters rolled on screen, mixed with angry comments scrolling beneath them. Maya shook her head. "See, even now it's all theater. Not one network's talking about what the ruling actually says. Just who won the round." Ben sighed. "Because that's what keeps people watching. You want honesty? Honesty doesn't trend." She gave him a tired look. "That's the problem. People don't care what's real if it doesn't make them feel something." The cafe door opened and a rush of cold air came in. For a second, everything felt still. Maya's phone buzzed again. A text from her editor. Can you write something on this? Keep it neutral. We just need clicks. She stared at the message for a long moment before putting the phone face down on the table. Ben noticed. Work? She nodded. Yeah, my editor wants me to write about it. He smiled slightly. So what are you gonna say? She looked out the window again, thinking. I'll say what everyone's feeling, but no one's admitting that this isn't about guilt or innocence anymore. It's about how tired people are of not knowing what to believe. Ben's expression softened. That's actually not bad. It's not good either, she said quietly. It's just true. Outside traffic kept moving. People walked by, talking on phones, scrolling news feeds, each with their own version of the story. Some angry, some celebrating, some just confused. The world didn't pause for the truth. It never did. Ben stood up to leave. You know, maybe the real story isn't about Trump or Carroll, he said, putting on his jacket. Maybe it's about us. How quick we are to decide who's right before we even understand what happened. Maya smiled faintly. Maybe. But that story doesn't sell. He gave a small wave and walked out into the November wind. Maya sat alone for a moment, watching his figure fade into the street. Then she picked up her phone again and opened a blank document. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She didn't know how to start the article yet, but she knew what it was really about. How justice, fame, and outrage had become entertainment, and how everyone was too busy choosing sides to notice what was actually lost. She began to type. The cafe noise faded into a quiet rhythm behind her, and the screen glowed brighter with every word. Outside, the headlines kept changing, but inside, she was chasing something different. Not a win, not a side, just a little piece of truth. The following Friday night, Maya found herself at a dinner party hosted by her old college friend Eleanor, a retired teacher known for her warm smile and sharp opinions. The dining room buzzed with easy laughter, the smell of roasted chicken, and the soft clinking of glasses. But underneath the cheerful atmosphere, there was tension waiting to rise, because sooner or later, someone was going to bring up that story. It didn't take long. Between the salad and the main course, Tom, a lawyer with graying hair and a voice that carried, mentioned the case. You all saw the ruling, right? The judge rejecting that $85 million demand? He said. Makes sense to me. Courts aren't supposed to hand out lottery tickets. Across the table, Maya set down her fork. She had promised herself she wouldn't jump in too soon. But she couldn't help it. It wasn't a lottery ticket, she said. It was a claim about harm, about what she went through. Tom shrugged. Maybe. But damages that high usually have to match real proof of financial loss. Feelings alone don't add up to that. Eleanor looked between them, smiling politely but watching closely. She knew where this was going. Still, she said, sometimes standing up for yourself costs you more than money. Maybe that was her point. Ben, sitting across from Maya, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. You mean to say 85 million is symbolic? Come on, that's not symbolism. That's a statement. It's like saying, I want to make this guy bleed. Maya turned toward him, her voice steady but firm. Maybe she wanted people to listen. Maybe that was the only way to make anyone pay attention. Ben gave a half smile. Attention she got. But that doesn't mean it's justice. Eleanor sighed softly. You two have been debating this all week, haven't you? Maya laughed under her breath. Maybe. The table fell quiet for a moment as plates were passed around. The topic hung in the air like smoke. Uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. Liam, a young teacher at the local high school, broke the silence. I think what bothers people, he said, isn't just the money. It's the idea that anyone can accuse someone powerful, and it becomes national news before anyone proves anything. Tom nodded. Exactly. We used to wait for verdicts. Now it's trial by media, Maya responded quickly. And what's the alternative? Stay quiet because people might not believe you? That's how injustice keeps going. People only speak up when they feel someone's listening. Ben pointed at her gently with his fork. But what if people start using that as a weapon? You ruin someone's reputation, even if the case doesn't hold up. No one remembers the outcome, just the accusation. That line drew a murmur around the table. Eleanor poured herself more wine and said quietly, I taught teenagers for 30 years. The truth's always messy. People lie, people tell half the story, people exaggerate, but I also know most victims never speak up at all. So when someone finally does, maybe the least we can do is hear them without tearing them apart. Maya smiled at that, grateful for the support. Exactly, she said. This isn't just about a lawsuit. It's about what kind of country we want to live in. One where powerful people can do whatever they want, or one where the system protects everyone. Tom looked thoughtful, and it's also about keeping that system fair. You can't have justice if emotions start replacing evidence. Judges have to follow law, not outrage. That struck Maya. She respected that point, even if it wasn't the one she wanted to hear. You're right, she admitted. But it's hard to separate emotion from justice when the harm itself is emotional. Ben nodded slowly. Yeah, but if we start judging cases based on feelings, where does it stop? Everyone's got a story that hurts. The conversation moved faster now, voices overlapping. Liam talked about how social media turns legal cases into public entertainment. Eleanor shared a story about a student who once accused another of cheating, and how the whole school picked sides before knowing what actually happened. Everyone had an example, and every story circled back to the same question. Who decides what's true when everyone's already chosen a side? Maya took a sip of water, listening more than speaking now. She realized that everyone in the room wasn't really arguing about Trump or Carroll anymore. They were arguing about trust, in people, in the system, in truth itself. Eleanor's husband Mark, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. His voice was calm but carried weight. Maybe we've stopped believing in good faith. Every case, every headline. We all assume there's some hidden agenda. Maybe the real problem isn't her or him. Maybe it's us. The room went silent again. Even Ben didn't have a comeback for that. Maya stared at her plate, thinking about what he said. She remembered how she'd covered other stories. The quick judgments, the online arguments, the readers who never cared about the details. Everyone wanted simple answers, heroes and villains. But life didn't work that way. Tom cleared his throat and tried to lighten the mood. Well, I'm glad I'm just a lawyer and not a judge. I don't envy the people who have to make these calls. Eleanor smiled faintly. Judges have rules. We have opinions. That's easier, a few people laughed, breaking the tension. The conversation moved on to lighter topics. A new restaurant in town, a football game, weekend plans. But the earlier discussion still lingered like a shadow, especially for Maya and Ben. When the night ended and people started saying goodbye, Ben helped Eleanor collect dishes while Maya grabbed her coat. As they walked out together, the cold air hit them, and their breath came out in pale clouds. Ben spoke first. You know, I get where you're coming from. I really do. I just don't trust the system to stay fair if every case becomes a headline. Maya nodded. And I get your point too. But sometimes the headlines are the only reason people care enough to look. He smiled. So we're both right? She laughed softly. Or both wrong. They walked toward their cars in silence for a while. The street was quiet, except for the crunch of gravel under their shoes. Finally, Ben said, You ever think maybe none of this is about the case itself? Maybe it's about how tired everyone is. Of fighting, of arguing, of trying to find truth in a world that doesn't seem to want it? Maya looked up at the stars, faint through the city haze. Yeah, she said. People want closure. But justice isn't built for that. It's slow, complicated, and it doesn't fit in a headline. He unlocked his car and grinned. You should put that in your article. I might, she said, smiling back, if my editor lets me. Ben got in his car and waved as he pulled away. Maya stood there for a moment, watching his taillights fade into the night. She could still hear the dinner conversation replaying in her mind. Eleanor's calm wisdom, Tom's logic, Ben's frustration. Everyone had spoken honestly, but no one had changed their mind. As she drove home, the radio was already discussing the next political story. The world had moved on to another headline, another controversy. But Maya knew that what they'd talked about, truth, fairness, the space between justice and revenge, would stick with her long after the noise faded. Because the real divide wasn't between Trump and Carroll. It was between people's need to believe something simple and the complicated, uncomfortable truth hiding underneath. Days passed, but the story wouldn't die. Every time Maya opened her phone, the same headline appeared in a new form. Trump triumphs. Carroll silenced. Justice or injustice? It was like a storm that refused to fade, feeding off attention. Talk shows replayed clips, podcasts argued over motives, and millions of people debated in comment sections as if they were in the courtroom themselves. For Maya, it wasn't just another news cycle. She felt stuck between two worlds, the one that demanded quick takes and the one that craved real understanding. She wanted to write something meaningful, something that cut through the noise. But every time she started typing, the words felt wrong. Her editor had called her the day before. We need a piece that moves traffic, he'd said. Something sharp, something emotional. Don't overthink it. Readers want drama. But drama wasn't what she wanted anymore. She wanted truth. The quiet, complicated kind that doesn't trend. That morning she met Ben again at the cafe. He looked tired, his hands still marked with grease from the shop. You look like you haven't slept, he said, raising an eyebrow. I haven't, Maya admitted. Every time I start writing about this case, I stop. I don't know how to say what I mean without it sounding like every other headline. Ben smirked. Welcome to modern media. Nobody wants what you mean. They want what makes them feel something. She looked up. That's the problem. We've replaced facts with feelings. He nodded. Yeah, but feelings pay the bills, Maya sighed. That's what everyone keeps saying. But if we only write for clicks, what happens to trust? What's journalism worth if it becomes entertainment? Ben leaned back. You tell me. You're the journalist. She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out her laptop and opened a blank page. The cafe noise filled the space. Coffee being poured, low chatter, the sound of typing from a nearby student. Finally, she started to write. Her article began. Justice in the age of outrage. She wrote fast, letting her thoughts flow. She described how every major trial had turned into a public performance. One side cheering, the other side condemning, and the truth lost in between. She explained how social media had turned pain into content, how outrage had become a kind of currency. When she finished the first draft, she showed it to Ben. He read quietly, his brow furrowing as he went. After a minute, he said, You're saying people don't really want justice. They want to feel like they're on the right side. Exactly, Maya said. We say we care about truth, but really, we care about belonging. We want our opinions confirmed. We want heroes and villains, not complexity. Ben closed her laptop slowly. That's harsh, but maybe true. Harsh truths are the only kind that matter, she said. Ben nodded, then looked thoughtful. So what happens when both sides believe they're fighting for truth? Doesn't that mean someone has to lose? Maya looked out the window. That's the tragedy. We've forgotten that two things can be true at once. You can believe in accountability and still think the system's unfair. You can respect the law and still question it. Ben gave a low whistle. You should be teaching this stuff, she laughed softly. I'm just trying to make sense of it. Later that afternoon, Maya's article went live. She didn't expect much. Maybe a few comments, maybe a few shares. But by evening, it had taken off. People were reading it everywhere. Some praised her for being balanced. Others accused her of sitting on the fence. A few said it was the first piece that made them stop and think. That night, she sat in her apartment, scrolling through the comments. One message stood out. Finally, someone said what we're all feeling. We don't know who to trust anymore. She stared at that comment for a long time. It wasn't praise that moved her. It was recognition. Someone out there understood. The next morning, her phone buzzed with calls. A radio station wanted her to do an interview. A local TV show wanted her opinion on the cultural meaning of the trial. For the first time in weeks, she felt like maybe the chaos had a purpose. During the radio interview, the host asked, So, Maya, do you think justice was served? She paused. I think justice is complicated, she said slowly. The court made a legal decision, but socially, emotionally, people are still divided. Some feel victory, others feel betrayal. That says more about us than the verdict itself. The host was silent for a moment before saying, That's a very honest answer. After the interview, she called Ben. I think I survived, she said, laughing nervously. He chuckled. You didn't just survive. You made people think. Maya leaned back on her couch. Maybe, but I also realized something. Truth isn't disappearing. It's just harder to see because we're drowning in noise. Ben said quietly. And maybe the noise is what people use to avoid silence. Silence makes you think. That line stuck with her long after the call ended. That evening, she took a walk downtown. It was chilly, the kind of early winter night where lights shimmered off wet pavement. Everywhere she looked, screens glowed from inside restaurants and stores, showing news clips, debates, endless scrolling updates. People walked by with phones in hand, arguing about the latest twist. But no one seemed to be listening to anyone else. Everyone was talking, shouting, reacting, but not understanding. Maya thought about how stories used to feel slower, how people once waited for morning papers instead of minute-by-minute updates. Now, truth was instant, but it felt thinner. When she got home, she opened her laptop again. She wanted to write more, not about the case, but about what it revealed. She wrote about exhaustion, how people were tired of being angry but didn't know how to stop. She wrote about empathy, how hard it was to feel it for someone who thought differently. And she wrote about courage, not the loud kind seen on TV, but the quiet kind it takes to keep listening even when it hurts. As she typed, she thought about Ben, about Eleanor, about everyone who had argued at that dinner table. None of them were cruel. None of them were blind. They just saw the world through their own pain and experiences. When she finished, she leaned back and read the last line out loud. Maybe justice isn't only about what's fair. Maybe it's also about what we choose to learn from it. She sat in the silence that followed, feeling calm for the first time in days. The next morning, her second article went viral. Not because it was loud or controversial, but because it was human. People shared it with comments like, "This feels real," and "This is how we should be talking about these things." Ben texted her later. "See? Told you people still care about truth." She smiled at the screen. Maybe they did. Maybe the noise wasn't all there was. For the first time in a long while, Maya felt hopeful. Not that the arguments would end, but that conversations could start again. Because the bigger picture wasn't about who won or lost in court. It was about what the whole country was slowly realizing, that justice, truth, and empathy weren't sides to choose, but bridges to rebuild. Weeks passed, and the noise around the case finally began to fade. News cycles moved on, chasing new stories, new controversies, new debates. But for Maya, something about it still lingered. She couldn't stop thinking about what the whole thing revealed. Not about Trump or Carroll, but about people, about how quickly anger rises, how rarely understanding follows. Winter had deepened in Ohio. The sky hung low, gray and heavy. Snow lined the edges of the streets, and breath came out in white clouds. Maya sat in the same cafe where all this had started, typing her thoughts. Her article from last week, the one about justice and empathy, had reached more readers than she ever expected. But instead of feeling proud, she felt humbled. People had written to her, strangers from across the country, sharing how they too felt lost between what they believed and what they saw online. One message came from a retired police officer who said, "It's strange, isn't it? We used to trust verdicts. Now we trust whoever speaks louder." Another came from a young woman who said, "I was on Carroll's side, but your story made me realize it's not just about sides." Those words stuck with Maya. That morning, Ben walked into the cafe, brushing snow off his jacket. He grinned when he saw her. "Still writing?" he asked. "Trying to," Maya said, smiling back. "But it feels different now. Less about proving something. More about understanding it." Ben sat down, ordering his usual black coffee. "That's called growth," he said with a wink. Maya rolled her eyes. "Don't make it sound like a self-help book." He laughed, but his tone shifted quickly. "You know, it's weird. When that case started, everyone at my shop had an opinion. Loud ones. Now nobody talks about it. It's like the world forgot." She nodded. "That's what we do now. Outrage has a short shelf life. People move on before they even know what happened." Ben looked thoughtful. "Do you ever think that's the real loss? Not who won or lost, just how fast we forget?" Maya paused, letting the question sink in. "Yeah," she said softly. "We forget, and then we repeat. Different story, same pattern." Outside, a man walked by holding a newspaper. The headline on the front wasn't about Carroll or Trump anymore. It was about a new controversy, a different face, a different fight. The cycle never stopped. Maya closed her laptop. "You know what's strange? This case wasn't really about law. It was about pride, pain, and reputation. But somehow it turned into entertainment." Ben stirred his coffee. "That's the world now. People don't want quiet justice. They want a show." "Yeah," Maya said. "But real justice is quiet. It happens slowly, in paperwork and evidence." "It doesn't trend," Ben smiled slightly. "You sound like a teacher." "Maybe that's what journalism's supposed to be," she said. "Not shouting, just teaching," he nodded, impressed. "You know, I didn't expect you to find peace in all this." "I didn't either," she said, smiling faintly. "But maybe peace isn't about everyone agreeing. Maybe it's just about listening." Later that day, Maya took a walk downtown. The city was glowing with Christmas lights. Families carried shopping bags, kids laughed, and couples held hands under twinkling trees. The world looked softer, quieter. Yet underneath, the same invisible tension hummed, the same need people had to argue to be right. She passed a TV in a store window replaying old clips from the trial. A news anchor spoke in a polished voice about the cultural impact of the case. Maya stopped and watched for a moment. The screen showed Trump's confident grin, then Carroll's composed face. Two people, two versions of truth, caught in the same endless story. For the first time, Maya didn't feel angry or frustrated. She felt empathy, not agreement, but understanding. Both had fought for something they believed in. Both had paid a price. Maybe that was the cost of conviction in modern America. As she continued walking, she thought about how divided people had become. Every argument now felt like a contest, not a conversation. Every disagreement felt personal. But somewhere deep down, she knew that most people wanted the same things: fairness, respect, and a chance to be heard. They just didn't know how to find it anymore. That night, she visited Eleanor for dinner. The same friends who had argued weeks ago were there again. Tom, Liam, Mark, and of course Ben. The mood was lighter this time. The case wasn't the main topic, but eventually, Eleanor brought it up with her usual calm tone. "So," she said, passing around soup bowls, "any thoughts now that the storm's over?" Tom smiled wryly. "Storm's never really over. Just quieter," Ben shrugged. "Honestly, I've stopped following it. Doesn't change my life either way." Liam said, "It changed the way people talk about justice, though. I see it in my students. They think the loudest voice wins." Eleanor sighed. "Maybe that's what adults taught them." Everyone went quiet for a second. Then Maya spoke. "I think it taught us something else, too. That no one really wins these things. We all just walk away with our version of truth." Tom nodded. "That's true. And the hardest part is admitting that your version might not be the only one." Maya smiled. "Exactly." Eleanor looked at her warmly. "Sounds like you've been doing a lot of thinking." "I've been doing a lot of listening," Maya replied. "It's harder, but it feels better." After dinner, as they sat by the fireplace, the conversation turned soft. They talked about their families, old memories, and plans for the new year. The arguments that once felt sharp now seemed small compared to the comfort of shared laughter. Before leaving, Ben turned to Maya and said quietly, "You know, I think you were right about something." "About what?" she asked. "That justice isn't about destroying someone. It's about understanding what happened and what it teaches us," he said. "You made me see that." Maya smiled, touched. "Then I guess all those debates were worth it," he grinned. "Maybe. But next time, let's argue about something less stressful. Like pizza toppings," she laughed. "Deal." When she got home that night, she sat by her window and watched the snow fall under the streetlights. Everything looked peaceful, slow, almost timeless. The world outside was still full of arguments and headlines, but in that small moment, she felt something steady, hope. She opened her journal and began to write one last reflection. Justice isn't about noise. It's about what we learn when the noise fades. Every argument, every story, every trial shows us something about who we are. Proud, flawed, human. Maybe the goal isn't to win, but to understand. When she finished writing, she closed the notebook and smiled. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't writing for clicks or attention. She was writing because she believed in what she was saying. Outside, the city lights flickered like small stars. Somewhere, another story was already beginning, another debate waiting to unfold. But Maya had learned something powerful, that truth doesn't need to be shouted. Sometimes it just needs to be heard. And in a world that moved too fast, maybe that simple act, listening, was the truest form of justice left.